Siblings and sisters and brothers, welcome. The United Church of Christ is located in Cleveland, Ohio, which is historically Erie land, and we are settlers in this place. We are here today to talk about the doctrine of discovery, to honor the land and the people who were on this land then and today, and listen in their own voices as we move forward. Welcome to Tuesdays for Nurture. This is an education webinar series every Tuesday where we faithfully focus on education for the people of God. Our topics range from faith-filled politics to how-tos in congregational life to the impacts of current realities on the life of the church and beyond. And all of this and more will be featured. Every webinar has clear steps about what you can do to change the church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. So I am honored today to be joined by all sorts of incredible people. But before you meet them, I'm going to pass to my esteemed colleague, Roberto Ochoa, to speak about the doctrine of discovery and where we're going in the midst of this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Roberto Ochoa, the Program Associate for Congregations of Color and Ethnic Identified Congregation for the United Church of Christ. In 2013, during the 29th gathering of the General Synod of the United Church of Christ, a resolution was passed to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which authorized the genocides of indigenous peoples and the theft of their lands. Today, we are privileged to have 3 First Nation American Indian leaders to speak to us. In their own words, the impact that the theory of the doctrine of discovery has had on them and their nations. And before I go into what is the doctrine of discovery, let me introduce them to you right now. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we have Ronnie Preston, originally from the San Carlos Reservation, Arizona, and is an artist, storyteller, singer, and dancer with Woodland Sky Dance Troupe. Welcome, Ronnie. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing very fabulous.
So good to have you with us. And from Minneapolis, Minnesota, it is my pleasure to welcome Reverend Marlene Helgemo, pastor of All Nations UCC and the executive director for UCC Council of American Indian Ministries. Good afternoon, Pastor Marlene. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, everyone. And we're off to a great event for the next hour. So I'm so pleased that all of you are joining us today.
I'm so glad you're with us. And from Cleveland, Ohio, with great gratitude, we have Josh Hunt, who is an activist and co-chair of the Cleveland Indigenous Coalition. Hey, Josh, how's it going? And thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's going, considering we're in turbulent times. So thank you so much for having me, and I feel honored to be here.
Gotcha. It's an honor for all of you to be with us today. So what is the doctrine of discovery? Well, allow me to quote for today's discussion the definition we have, which can be found in the United Church of Christ website under Justice and Witness Ministries. It goes, the discovery concept has basically 2 separate references. Theologically, it provided the spiritual, in this case, Christian rationale for Europeans since the time of the Crusades to conquer and confiscate other lands, including what is now the United States. There were papal documents from popes of the Westernized Catholic Church based in Rome, which laid out the groundwork that later Protestants adopted. It treated the indigenous people as if they were animals, that they had no European title to the land on which they lived. Thus, the church justified removing and killing them. Legally, the discovery concept was written into the United States law as a doctrine to deny land rights to American Indians through the Supreme Court case known as Johnson versus McIntosh in 1823. That decision stripped American Indians from the right of their own independence, providing a rationale for taking land away from the indigenous peoples with the support of the United States federal law. As a concept of public international law, it continues to be cited as recently as 2005. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues noted that the doctrine of discovery was the foundation of the violation of the indigenous peoples' human rights. And I must add, this affected globally as well. So to start us off with this discussion, we have asked Ronnie Preston to open with a drum song blessing before he shares his story. Ronnie?
Oh, thank you. We'll be singing a song here, and as a prelude to what you're going to be coming up here, this drum that you hear is the heartbeat of Mother Earth amongst our people. And although our times have changed, things have changed, we have changed. Our drum and our music remains the same as it did, as our ancestors once sang on this beautiful land here. These are things that I'll be discussing and telling you stories about from my point of view of who we are as Native people. And I'm very honored to sing this song for you. And to hear my drum is to hear my heartbeat. As I sing my song to you, I feel a great spirit, a great feeling in you. So thank you, Mr. Ochoa, for giving me that honor of singing this opening song for us. There are many things that I can discuss about this doctrine of discovery. But what hurts me the most, or what I sometimes always think about, is that all the beautiful things in this earth that we live upon, that we see every day, sometimes people take for granted. And there was this tree that was growing down by the lakefront, and it's about 350 years old. It's a big old giant white oak, gorgeous tree. And I was encountered by some people who just wanted to cut it down because they wanted to build a sidewalk to the river, and not knowing or not caring anything about this tree. And it made me think about, this tree was here before we were here. This tree could tell you a story the same way that it told stories to the people back when the tree was 300 years ago. The water sounded the same. The leaves were the same color. Everything on that tree remained the same for 300 years. Only we have changed. And in our society, I've seen that things have changed. We have changed. And we as Native people, we see and we feel about racism that's so, it's such a big issue right now with the Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. The circle that we live upon, as the Creator put us upon this earth, told us a story of 4 different colors of race: red race, black race, yellow race, and white race, divided equally. It gave us our medicine wheel. And the Creator asked the people of this earth to treat each other with respect, love, and kindness. No one man was greater than another. We were created equal. This was a story that was told me by my dad many, many years ago, as he told me stories about the boarding schools that came to his people in the San Carlos, Arizona, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, when they came and took his family from him and put him into the school, and they cut his hair, and they took his traditional clothing, and they imposed Christianity upon him, and scolded my father for if he spoke his own language, he was taught that this was a wrong thing. This is not the way. And so he was punished for speaking his own language. These are the stories that my father told me as I was growing up as a young man. And I see the impact of what it's done to our people. For a long time, I realized that the United States of America tried to eliminate indigenous people as a race of people upon this earth. It's funny to me because a while back, a person told me, hey, why don't you go home? And I had to think for a minute. I'm indigenous. I am home. But these are the kind of things that people forget about. And so when I think about this doctrine of discovery, I think about all the things that our ancestors went through, my parents went through, what I'm going through, and what my children are going to go through. I worry about these things. And as an educator and a teacher, I use my drum and I use my eagle feathers to teach people about who we are. And as I've said many times before, when the new people came to this brand new world, they encountered a great race of people who wore face paint upon their face and eagle feathers in their hair. And through all the traumatic history and traumatic trauma of our language being stripped from us, our land being taken from us, our earth being taken from us, I would like to let everybody know that we are still here, and we are still a very proud race of people. I am a very proud member of the San Carlos Apache Nation out of Arizona. I do my best to sing and dance and honor the people in a good way like that. And Before I leave, I would like to send a special blessing out to all of those who are with me and all of those that are here. I would like to say a very big thank you to this committee for allowing me to serve as a panelist. I'm very honored to share these stories with you. And one of the things that we talk about is the ego, Migizi, and the gifts that the ego gives us. And it wasn't too long ago that I lost a good friend of mine. And as my elders told me, we use these eagle feathers to pray. We use these eagle feathers to honor people. Thus, we use different things of the eagle to send our prayers out. And for this, I have my eagle bone whistle with me. And as I leave you all today, I will blow this whistle, welcoming the Great Spirit to come bless this area, bless all of us here today who are coming together to discuss such a sensitive issue. I would like to say again, thank you all. And as I leave you, I blow my whistle for all of you out there. And I thank you all for having me talk. And we don't say goodbye in our language. We'll just say, I'll see you all again. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, again, for the beautiful blessing of your music and your song and your storytelling. Now I'd like to invite Pastor Marlene to share her story.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be on here with so many people today. I greet you from the Midwest. I'm sitting north of Medicine Lake in Plymouth, Minnesota. It's a beautiful fall day, and I relish it because we're not going to have very many days like this. The sun's shining, and that's kind of what I hope is reflected in our hearts right now. I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, and our tribal homelands are mostly Wisconsin, northern Illinois, parts of northeast Iowa, and some parts of Minnesota, depending on what century you're in. But anyway, I want to thank the United Church of Christ for lifting up the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. The UCC has joined several mainline denominations who have passed resolutions such as ours. And during this all has happened just in the last decade, led by the Episcopalians, who did their first resolution in 2009. And the Episcopalians were really busy on doing this, and were able to produce a lot of wonderful things, which the rest of our church bodies, depending on which mainline denomination you're part of, we were given permission by the Episcopalians to use their thing, because it's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I would encourage some of you, when you are just getting started and understanding what this repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery is go to the Episcopalian.org and look up Doctrine of Discovery. And they have a lot of good resources there that many of us in other denominations have used throughout the years. The other denomination that put forth an early resolution on this was the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers. And they put out their resolution in 2009, the same year as the Episcopalians. So there was a wave that was beginning to start, which I believe is probably inspired by the Holy Spirit. where the Holy Spirit just looked down very pitiful on us here in the United States and said, you need to tell the truth. You need to know what really has happened and why we are in the place that we are. And so at those junctures in 2009, and those things really start a couple years before. It gets passed in 2009, but work probably began in 2006, 2005, maybe even as early as 1980, because for some of us, we always knew that the church really needed to speak out on this. The third one that looked at the doctrine of discovery was the United Methodist Church. And then and then we had the UCC, and we passed ours in 2013. And that was a lot of work because, you have to start from understanding that really probably nobody has even heard of the doctrine of discovery. It's not taught that much in our public school system. And so you really have to work gingerly at getting this idea started and getting all the information out about what is the doctrine of discovery. And I'm appreciative of Roberto for sharing at the beginning what it is that we're talking about. And so at the 29th Synod of the UCC, we passed our own repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. The Mennonites followed. And we're very happy that in 2014, that they had an ad hoc group that was, going to share information and looking at how they could dismantle the doctrine of discovery. I'm a Lutheran pastor serving the UCC, so I figured I'm going to get into heaven one way or another. And I'm happy to say that the Lutheran Church passed their doctrine of discovery, the repudiation, in 2016. And they're just beginning to start looking at how they can inform the church membership about how they can educate and, enhance the understanding of what this really means. So when we look at this doctrine of discovery, the UN at their 11th session passed a big document on Indigenous issues, and it was on the doctrine of discovery, and it's 19 pages. And so I invite you to go to the UN and look at the UN Permanent Forum on and look at that, because it's a fairly well thought out historical document about not only, like Roberto said, did this happen to the United States, but it basically happened to Indigenous people all over the country, all over the world. And so we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of what that meant when people thought that they could just come in and steal land. One of my friends who does a lot of public speaking on this matter, when she goes and talks to church groups, she starts out saying, "You're all living on stolen land." And if that doesn't jar you a little bit, then she proceeds to tell you about living on stolen land. So from members of congregations, you ask yourselves, well, what can we do? And I'm saying there's a lot of information out there right now. Just since 2009, since these denominations have passed this, that you can find a lot of information out there about how you can begin to educate yourself. And like I said, the Episcopalians really started this, and they had a lot of funds that they could put into this at that time. And since then, a lot of our church denominations had to pull back on funding in all sorts of arenas of our ministries. And so the Episcopalians said, well, we did it, use our materials, begin there. And then you'll find other pathways to learn more about it. But they have a really good video. And if you look on their website, go look at their video. It's written for an Episcopalian membership audience, but the information is factual and still the same. And so, that's one place that you can begin. So I say that when we look at what we can do, I think of education and action. So my young friend, Vance Blackfox is the communications director for the Native American Indian Boarding School Healing Coalition. And he has gone around and done what we call the blanket exercise. And it was taken from Canada when the Canadians were looking at the impact of boarding schools on their population. And but what the blanket exercise basically does is it takes you through very briefly, because this is a historical thing that's been 500 years old, right? But it takes you through the kind of the history of the oppression of what's happened when we first had contact with what would say Anglo folks coming to this land. It's very, very impactful, and I'm going to share the information about how you can get a hold of Vance with Roberto, and he can dispense that if you are interested in learning more about looking at how the blanket exercise might come to your congregation or to your region to do that and to do some learning. It takes about 2 to 3 hours, so it's an event. It's an event that you would have to plan for and you know, and use in your communities. And I'd have to say that 7 out of 10 times that I've seen the blanket exercise being done, it brings tears. You know, it brings tears to people's eyes, thinking that, wow, we didn't know all this about what's happened to this country and everything. The other thing I'd like to share with you is relationships. Get to know the tribal nations that are around you, where you live, where your congregation is, where your church resides. Do you have relationships with the local Indian reservation or your Indian local communities? And build relationships. That's really important. That's what it's all about for us to be Christians in this world, is to build relationships with one another. And I would encourage each and every one of you to go find a tribal person, become friends with them. And get to know them, get to know who they are, of these people that might live very close to you. We found out statistically, if you lived in the Midwest, almost every congregation, oh, I can't remember how that worked now, but just about every congregation is located within 60 miles of an Indian reservation. And when we survey some of those congregations, we'll say, have you ever talked to the leadership of that reservation? They'll say, no. Do you know what tribe there is there? And they might not even know that, you know? So it's really important. I'm glad to see so many in the chats when we started out. Know whose land that you're living on. Know whose land that you're living on. Yesterday, the tribal community, or the American Indian community of Minneapolis, met at sunrise. I had to get up before the sun rose. I hardly ever do that, but I did yesterday. And we met on the beaches of Bademakaska, which used to be called Lake Calhoun. But in the last decade, Indians and allies worked to change that name, which almost every business around that lake has the name Lake Calhoun. But we found out that Calhoun was a slave owner. And we thought, we don't want to have one of the best lakes, one of the most beautiful lakes that everybody goes to in the center of Minneapolis, go to that lake with a name like that. So we asked some local Dakota people, saying, what do you remember this lake's name was? And they said, it's Bademakaska. So we went through a whole period of 2-3 years of arguing and enlisting people to join us, but the name was changed. The name was changed, and I am so happy for that. Yesterday, a lot of places around our country celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day. And I was glad to see that the bishop of the ELC sent out a statement on Indigenous Peoples Day. And the first thing that she said is the Evangelical Lutheran Church-wide office sits in an Indigenous place. What is now known as Chicago remains the home of many Native nations. Historically and now, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois people have congregated and have lived at the crossroads along the banks of what is now known as Lake Michigan. The places where every synod has its office and every congregation built its place of worship, and where every Lutheran, because remember, this is a Lutheran bishop that put this out, and seminary was established, belong to a people. And so, you know, she said one of the first ways to acknowledge that is to acknowledge the land that you're on. So I was really pleased to see in our chat today that a lot of people, you know, told us where they were from. So another thing I'd like to share with you real quickly, you know, it's hard to ask Indian people to talk for 7 minutes. That hardly ever happens very well. But I'm going to refer all of you to get acquainted with National Congress of American Indians. They're one of the largest, oldest national Indian organization in our country, and it brings together tribal leadership from all of our tribes. So my question for you today is, how many tribal nations are federally recognized by the United States government? And if we were all together in one great big large room of 300, 400 of us, I'd ask you to write down a sheet of paper how many federally recognized tribes there are. And believe me, when I've done it before, people have said, oh, there's 70, oh, there's 50, oh, there might be 200. But literally, there is 574 federally recognized tribes right now in what we know as the United States. Interestingly, 29 of them are in Alaska. And the others that are left after 229 are in the 35 states. And so you'd learn all of this from the NCI website. If you look on the lower right side, when you open that up, you're going to see that there is something that you can click on, and it's asking you to learn about tribal nations, citizenship, history, and contemporary issues. I want you to read that. It's a primer, and it's really good. It's something that is updated all the time, and so you will get a good overview about who we are as people in the United States. So as we look at all of this, there's a lot of things to do. First of all, like I said, develop some relationships with people that are close to you in your community. And then I also would like to say that there are a number of resources that are found on the UCC site. And one of the most important things that I'd like to leave you with is think about being a public advocate for American Indians. Our church, through the Washington, D.C. office, has a beautiful woman there, Sandy Sorensen, who keeps up on all the tribal legislation that benefits Indian country. And when we need votes, when we need people to walk the halls of Congress, she's the first one that I contact and say, what can we do, Sandy, to make sure that this bill gets passed that will, help support and help make Indian country better because of the laws that we make. So I think my time is up. So thank you.
Pastor Marlene, you gave us a lot to think about. I mean, 574 federally recognized tribal nations. Let's let that sink in for a minute. And I am so grateful for your work in this, and especially up in my, my former home out there in St. Paul. So again, thank you so much for the information. Now it's, to hear another voice, and my pleasure of working with this young man. I am calling you young because I'm an elder. Josh, welcome and share us your story.
Okay, 34 years of life in 7 minutes. Well, my name is Joshua Hunt, and I am coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. I am Cheyenne, or as we call ourselves, Sicistus, the people, because before European settlers came here and started naming us without our consent, we just referred to ourselves as the people. And growing up in Cleveland with my parents and my sister, being Native, being Indigenous, being Cheyenne was an afterthought. Yeah, we're Native, but whatever. And like many people living in the United States and elsewhere in the Americas, I thought all the real Indians are dead, and I'm not one of them. So I internalized that kind of oppression, that kind of erasure. And I always knew I was Native. I always knew I was Cheyenne. And as I was growing up and as I was becoming an adult, I had non-natives telling me that I should get in touch with that identity. I should learn more about my Cheyenne identity and history. And I just never had the motivation. And then after taking a long gap between high school and going back to college for an undergrad, it was there. I had thought about it. And then I decided to go back to college, and it was there that I took a couple of introductory courses in Native American history. And they changed my life. I don't think I'd be here right now had I not taken those classes. And being in Cleveland, they were powerful because I got this overview of history from before, what I'll say is, Columbus, pre-Columbian, pre-European settlers, to present day, 21st century. Because yes, natives are still here living in the 21st century. Ronnie, Marlene, and I are living proof of that, as is Roberto. It was powerful living here in Cleveland, getting that history, because without even being able to put my finger on it, I knew that our Cleveland baseball team was racist and harmful, but I couldn't articulate why or how. And that frustrated me because so many people were ready to disagree with me about that, and I couldn't defend it. So I got involved with the local Native community here in Northeast Ohio, and I started to read up and study on that issue. And I'm able to give a competent PowerPoint presentation on that issue. And with our recent campaign for the four major Native American organizations here in Northeast Ohio, which consists of the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance, in which I am the vice chair, the American Indian Movement of Ohio, the Lake Erie Native American Council, and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, Lake Erie Professional Chapter. We came together and formed the Cleveland Indigenous Coalition to combat this modern form of racism that Native American sports mascots, Halloween costumes, Columbus Day, Thanksgiving, or as I like to call it, Thanks-taking, and those are all examples of erasure. All of those serve to erase Indigenous people from the 21st century. And if we don't exist in the 21st century, if we don't exist right now in the present, then there's no reason to pass legislation that would benefit our ways of life, that would benefit our ancestral lands and things like that. So it becomes much easier to discriminate and other a group of people if you erase them from existence and then internalize that oppression, which I had done. And I am currently, within the last 5 or so years, I've been trying to decolonize and to purge myself of that toxic oppression. So that's the work I've been involved with. As far as the Doctrine of Discovery goes, there are obviously historians, there are obviously scholars who can better speak to it than I can, and they're in the Google Doc and otherwise. But my basic understanding is there are a series of papal bulls put out by the Vatican, Roman Catholic Church, the office of the Pope, and those series of papal bulls, they formed the basis, they served as the basis and justification for the Doctrine of Discovery, the global slave trade of the 15th and 16th centuries, and they served as the basis and justification for the age of imperialism. The age of imperialism, which brought death and destruction to indigenous peoples all over the world and in the lands that we now call the Americas. There's so many more things to say about that. So I just look at the Doctrine of Discovery as something of pure evil that was used to empower white Christians to commit acts of genocide and brutality against indigenous peoples all over the world, and to disenfranchise us from our lands and our ways of life. And I'm hoping, and obviously it's still active today. It's not a thing of the past, it's active today. As recently as 2005, when the United States Supreme Court ruled against an indigenous nation, I think the Osage people, ruled against them, and using the Doctrine of Discovery and its offshoot, the Manifest Destiny, as justification for ruling against the Osage people. And the implications of that is it harmed indigenous peoples of the United States. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion on that, which was very harmful and detrimental. And she later regretted it. But I would say to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, your regret does not undo the harm you and the Supreme Court have caused us. So I'm hoping that there will be a large movement of Christians, natives, and our allies to not only repudiate the Doctrine of Discovery, but to thoroughly dismantle it. And I thank you, and I feel honored to be here with my relatives, Ronnie and Marlene. Thank you.
And Josh, thank you for the hard work you're doing. And talking about the work you're doing out in Cleveland, what is it that you'd like people to take away from what you're actively doing, and hope that they do?
Right. In a nutshell, I would like people to fully understand, especially school boards and school superintendents, because Ohio is #1 in the country for the most public schools that have a harmful racist Native American sports mascot and team name. So I would like people to understand that Native American sports mascots, like that of the Cleveland Major League Baseball team, the Atlanta Braves, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chicago Blackhawks, they perpetuate harmful racist stereotypes of Native Americans. We have zero control over these mascots. It's the dominant white Euro-American culture that has control over these things. We have zero control over these things. So they are harming us. They are also harming, the science shows, Asian Americans. They're harming non-natives as well. So Native children are being harmed in the public schools because they're being discriminated against, they're being stereotyped against. and non-native white children are being harmed because they're being taught that it is okay, it is acceptable to stereotype and discriminate against an entire race of people. I would like them to understand that, and I would like them to learn more about the reality of those mascots, because wherever you are in the world, I mean, wherever you are in the United States, I should say, you have at least one school, many public schools that your tax dollars are paying for that have a harmful racist Native American sports mascot or team name. And it's harming not just the school in which has the mascot, it's harming its rival schools as well, because the rival schools of that school will put up banners at pep rallies that say, "Hey, Indians, get ready for a Trail of Tears Part 2, which was an act of genocide against multiple indigenous nations of the Southeast United States. It was a death march, and here are these children, these high school kids, engaging in this racist, harmful behavior. So I would like them to understand that and take it upon themselves to be advocates for change. Get together with the Native communities in your area and advocate the local school boards to make these changes immediately, because it's harming Native and non-Natives alike."
I want to bring in a question that someone asked about story. So specifically to Reverend Marlene, the power of stories is so important. So how are you using your story and the stories of the people that you hear in your ministry and work these days?
Well, Native country is so large and vast, and there's so much beauty and culture and wisdom and everything. It depends on the context of where I'm at and what the community that I'm addressing. I would have to say that I have seen such beauty in our tribal nations powering up their indigenous language. Our native languages were seeping away from us through all kinds of reasons, and I'd say maybe boarding schools was one of the main issues, where so many of our people a couple generations ago were taken away to boarding schools, and they were taken away for a long period of time, probably most of their school years. And so they were taken out of home, they were taken out of culture, they were taken out of community, and they didn't have a chance to learn all of the tribal ways from a seasonal point of view. Like all year long, there are ceremonies and activities about growing and planting and singing and praying and all this kind of stuff. And so one of the things that went with that was we were discovering that there weren't very many Native speakers left anymore. And so all of a sudden, there was this big wave where everybody is saying, we need to teach our children our tribal languages again. And so that's one thing that I look at, and it's so much fun to see some of our Native authors and writers that are writing stories in our Native languages. And we have Native artists that are illustrating those books, so that language is popping back. So that's just one story. The other story that is where I'm centered on right now is to look at the legislation that's happening for us in DC. Through one vote of Congress, we can be eliminated as reservations. We can have our tribal membership be eliminated. As recognized as a federally recognized tribe. So we are constantly working on improving the relationships. We're a nation to nation relationship with the federal government. All of these tribal nations, our nations, they have their own government, they have their own leaders, they have their own laws. And when you go on a reservation, there's laws, that are there that protect women and children and families and governance and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's stories all about why it's important to be able to, to come at this from a legislative point of view. And not a lot of people understand that. They just think of us as tribes or as reservations, people that live over there. But really, it's a nation. We are not just one nation here as the United States. We're 575 nations, right? That's the story that we have to tell. That's the history that we have to rewrite, retell, you know, I don't know.
Thank you, Pastor. And again, I want to thank, we could continue talking. There's so much to talk about. I mean, this is just not even the tip of an iceberg. This is the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip, because we do want to make space. I look forward for a conversation and the impact of the Doctrine of Discovery has had, like in our Hawaiian and Polynesian and islands and territories that United States claimed. That's another story that we need to keep conscious that, and then we pray to help bring forward to hear their voices, how Polynesian Hawaiian natives have been impacted by this as well. So much to cover. Thank you again, Pastor Marlene. Thank you again, Josh. Thank you, Ronnie, for your presence and your gift to us. I'm excited. What do you think? What do you think, Dr. Chris?
I am certain that this conversation has moved me. I know that it has moved those of you who are listening, whether you're here with us or you are watching the recording. And I commit to continuing to be in relationship and to doing this work. So I can speak for myself in that this is part of the work of what it means for me to be a Christian, is to be attentive to the history of what our faith has done and the intentionality of the faith that Christ is calling me to live into going forward. So I want to name that. We've mentioned so many resources. They are going to come out to you in the follow-up email, or they are below the YouTube channel listed for you to engage with more depth. And I want to say that if this is something that has moved you and you are going to take action as a result of this, please consider donating not only to the Indigenous folks and movements in your area, but also to the United Church of Christ and the annual fund, so we can continue to put on programs like this in ways that offer you tangible resources about how to bring out a just world where we are when we are. And you can do that by texting UCC to 41444. I will also say that as you're doing stewardship work in your congregations, please consider using the Beloved Love materials from the United Church of Christ, using language of 3 great loves. And those materials are rooted in our core values as the UCC, and come with a campaign resources document to help you use that within your congregation. So I want to name that as well. From here, I do want to let you know that there's a couple of exciting conversations coming up. First, on Thursday, we are going to have a worship service in our bodies. We're going to talk about bodies and sexuality and this incarnate way we show up in the world, and really give praise for that together in all of the ways our bodies work by ourselves and work together. We are going to, a week from today, there will be a conversation between Reverend Tracy Blackman and Brian McLaren talking about faith and doubt and connecting across difference. And as always, we welcome your presence with us, whether you're here or whether you're watching the recording. So thank you for being present with us. And I want to pass and invite over to Reverend Marlene. Will you please close us in a final prayer? So, and thank you again to all of you who are with us. What an incredible offering and joy to be witness to this space. I mean, like we said at the beginning, this is your space. This is your land. Of course, we are going to create space. So thank you for saying yes.
Thank you so much. This has been a lovely way to spend this afternoon. And I marvel that you've asked 3 Indians to hold their comments to 7 minutes. That doesn't ever happen. So we have seen a miracle happen. This is a closing that I use every Sunday at All Nations Indian Church in South Minneapolis. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to meet since March, but we are on Zoom a couple times a week for Sunday morning meditation time, and then Wednesday evening just to check in and see how we're all doing, just to check in up on the folks. So this is the blessing that everyone receives when they come to All Nations at the closing of our time together. it's been edited now because we're in cyberspace. So I'm going to say, as we leave this cyberspace circle, know that God loves this intertribal community and has called each one of us to be a blessing in the midst of the earth. God sends you forth from this intertribal community today to be lights to the world. Let your light so shine that people around you will be moved by the good things that you do to glorify our God in heaven. Go in peace. God is with you. Let us all say amen.